Hey everyone, it's Lexi. In today's video I'm going to be doing a review and discussion for Rose Under Fire by Elizabeth Wein. So for those of you who don't know, this book is about a girl named Rose who is an ATA pilot within the British Army during World War II, and one day she is flying back to England, but she gets captured by these German pilot and she is sent to a concentration camp known as Ravensbrück, which was actually a real camp that the Germans had made, and it's an all-women's camp. And during her stay there she ends up meeting and befriending what were known as the rabbits, which were women who had medical tests performed on them. So this book revolves around her struggle for survival and how she kind of builds these friendships with these women and how they kind of like small acts of defiance, which I think was really interesting to see, like just like little things like kind of embroidering like a little like USA on like her gown that she has to wear, and I really enjoyed that. This is kind of still within the Codename Verity world that Elizabeth Wein had created. So there are two characters from Codename Verity that also make appearance in this book. So you don't really have to read Codename Verity first, but I think it would be better to read Codename Verity first before I read this, because there are some things that are alluded to that happened in Codename Verity that are talked about in here. Overall, this book was just amazing. I gave it a 5 out of 5 stars. It at times is very difficult to read. I almost found it a little bit more difficult to read than Codename Verity just because of the subject matter and that some of these events did take place. Like the medical testing on the rabbits was actually something that happened. And so what's interesting is that this book is broken down into like 4 mini books, and it's written from Rose's perspective, like her narration, but for each like mini book that's in there, you can tell she's the same character, but she's very different. She's mature throughout all of them, which I thought was really interesting. I really liked how we could see kind of how much she's changed. Yeah, and it was interesting because it does talk about historical events, like they talk about the Nuremberg trials and all of that, and like some of the people that actually did testify in real life are in here as well, which was really good. So if you were a fan of Codename Verity, or if you were really into historical fiction, then I highly recommend that you check this book out. You will not be disappointed. It was just really good. It's heartbreaking, but it was beautifully written, and it's definitely probably one of my top historical fiction novels. Like, it's so good. So if you haven't checked it out, then I highly recommend that you do. So that will be kind of it for kind of like my spoiler-free review. So I'm going to go into more of a discussion. If you don't want anything spoiled, then I recommend that you check out now. I was super happy when they had Maddie in here as well, and how Maddie made Rose her like maid of honor for her wedding, and I really like that. I like how they do how she does reference Julie, which I thought was really good. And I loved how Anna made an appearance as well. Like when Rose was talking about who, like the person who was in charge of her like little work group, and I was like, just how like her mannerisms, like, oh my goodness, that's gonna be Anna. And it was like, I love how she kind of had a role in this as well, because she was a very strong female character that I really liked in Codename Verity, and it was just good to see her there as well. I thought it was also good how this book included how not everyone really knew what was going on within this camp, because when Rose was first captured, the pilot who kind of flew her there thought like it would just be like a work camp, like they'd be treated like fairly, but that wasn't really the case. And I think that's good to include, because not everyone realized what was going on. Like, no one believed it. They thought it was propaganda, and I think that's really important to include. I really loved the characters that we were introduced to in Ravensbrück. I really loved Lisette, Rosa, Elodie, Irina, and Katerina, and like I fell in love with all those characters and how they were a family and they had like small acts of defiance, and I think that was really good, and how resourceful they were and how they looked out for each other. I think that was really important to include, because like they're all in this together, and I really enjoyed how they helped support each other and they looked out for each other. I think that's really important to include, especially in something like this, just because it's so dark and you that was kind of like the light to this book. And oh my goodness, I love the escape that they had with Irina and Rose and Rosa. Like, I thought that was just so fun. Like, it was fun to read. Just because they ended up stealing that plane, it was just kind of like a crazy ending, but I couldn't believe it. It was really neat to see, and I also liked how Rose ended up making something of herself. Like, her poems got published, you know, she was being a journalist for the trials, and how she's a pre-med student. I think that's really good to show, like, she's grown and she's going to continue living her life. And even though, like, she didn't want to testify for the trials, and I think that's important because not everyone can talk about these things. I was curious though because Maddie ended up reading what Rose wrote in her journal, and she talks about Anna in there. So I'm curious if, like, Maddie, because they don't really talk about it, so I'm curious if, like, Maddie kind of figured out that that was Anna there, and I was really just kind of interested kind of that aspect of it. So overall, this book blew me out of the water. I was really worried going into this that it would not live up to the standards that Codename Verity had set, but it's just as good. Codename Verity I still think is the best, but this one is just as good. If you haven't checked it out, I highly recommend that you check out kind of like this series. So that's it, guys. I hope you enjoyed this video. Let me know in the comments below what you felt about this book, like what were some of your thoughts and opinions on it. So yeah, don't forget to give this video a thumbs up, and I'll see you next time. Bye, guys.